She was humiliated at the altar, but rose as a symbol of strength. He ran away from commitment, and years later faced his own downfall. Fate brought them to court, but this time, the roles were reversed. Between justice and redemption, shocking. Revelations stunned everyone. Before you dive into this inspiring story, subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories. The day was perfect. White flowers, smiling guests, the wedding march about to echo through the church. Emily looked at herself in the mirror, emotional and anxious, her trembling hands holding the bouquet. But what should have been the happiest moment of her life turned into tragedy. The groom disappeared minutes before the ceremony, leaving only a hasty note. "I can't do this. Forgive me." The news spread like thunder among those present. Her father announced the cancellation of the wedding with fiery eyes, while the bride collapsed on the floor, wrapped in her dress, as if hope had drained away with her veil. "Where is Ethan?" Emily asked between tears to her best friend and maid of honor, Lucy. "I don't know, Em. Nobody can reach him. His phone goes straight to voicemail." The bouquet of white roses and violets now lay abandoned on the seat of the limousine that would have taken her to the church. The makeup, meticulously applied hours earlier, was dissolving along with the dreams Emily had nurtured since childhood. 5 years of relationship, a newly purchased house, a carefully planned future. Everything was crumbling like a sandcastle, hit by the tide. Her father, Albert Morrison, a respected businessman in town, faced the situation with contained but devastating anger. It wasn't just the social embarrassment that was eating away at him. It was seeing his only daughter destroyed. In the small town of Clearwaters, everyone would comment on the case for months, perhaps years. "Daddy, he'll come back, won't he?" asked Emily, with a voice so fragile it broke the hearts of everyone around. Albert couldn't answer. He just hugged her, feeling his daughter's body tremble under the lace dress that had cost a small fortune. At the church, the priest tried to calm the more than 200 guests waiting for the ceremony to begin. Many already suspected something was wrong. Ethan's maid of honor, his sister Patricia, seemed as confused as everyone else. "He went out to buy water," said he was nervous. "After that I didn't see him again," she explained to the bride's father, who looked at her as if she were an accomplice to the crime. In the following hours, the banquet hall was dismantled. The 5-tier cake, decorated with edible pearls, was divided among the catering staff. The rings engraved with the couple's names remained in the blue velvet box on the coffee table at Emily's parents' house. For 3 days, Emily didn't leave her room. She refused food, visits, phone calls. On her cell phone, dozens of messages of concern accumulated, but none from Ethan. Social media exploded with speculation and indiscreet comments. Some defended the groom, claiming that better before than after. Others crucified him for such cowardice. Lucy practically moved into the Morrisons' house, sleeping on the sofa next to Emily's bed, making sure her friend wouldn't do anything rash. "You know what hurts the most?" said Emily on the 3rd sleepless night. There was no sign. "The day before yesterday we were choosing the song for our first dance. He was smiling, Lucy. He seemed happy." "Men are cowards, Em. Ethan was always weak for decisive moments." Lucy tried to console her, but knew that words were insufficient in the face of such pain. On the 4th day after the cancelled wedding, Ethan appeared. Without warning, without a phone call. He simply rang the doorbell at the Morrisons' house, still wearing the same clothes from the wedding day, as if he had spent the last few days wandering aimlessly. It was Albert who answered the door. His first impulse was to physically assault the man who had destroyed his daughter, but he managed to contain himself. Instead, he spat words loaded with venom. "What are you doing here? Finishing the job? Or maybe you want the gifts?" The businessman trembled with rage. "I need to talk." To her, Ethan replied, with deep circles under his eyes and an unshaven face, looking like a shadow of the elegant man everyone knew. Emily heard his voice from upstairs. Her heart raced. An explosive mixture of relief, anger, love, and disappointment invaded her. She slowly descended the stairs, wearing a robe over her pajamas without any makeup, her eyes swollen from crying so much. When he saw her, Ethan felt as if an invisible fist was squeezing his chest. The damage he had caused was stamped on the face of the woman who until a few days ago would have been his wife. "Why, Ethan?" was all she managed to say, her voice choked by held-back tears. Albert and Lucy watched them from the stairs, ready to intervene if necessary. The family's housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, who had helped raise Emily, observed from the kitchen door, her face contorted with indignation. "I was afraid. I wasn't ready." The justification sounded pathetic even to himself, but it was the only truth he had to offer. "I panicked, Emily. That full church, all the guests, the responsibility. I just couldn't do it." Emily felt as if each word was a new stab. 5 years together, hundreds of conversations about the future, about children, about growing old side by side. And now this. "You could have talked to me before, Ethan. We could have postponed. Done something smaller, anything." She tried to find logic. "Something that would make this betrayal less painful. But you preferred to humiliate me in front of everyone. Leave me there like an idiot, waiting for someone who would never come." Ethan tried to approach, but Emily instinctively backed away. "I know I made a mistake. I came here because I love you, because I want to fix this." He seemed sincere, with tears in his eyes, but something in his posture indicated that even he knew it was too late. "Fix it?" Emily laughed, a bitter and cutting laugh. "You think there's any fixing this? That we can just reschedule the wedding as if nothing happened? That I'll walk into that church again after what you put me through?" The room fell silent. Ethan lowered his head, defeated. He knew there was no possible defense for his actions. "I promised myself I would never allow you to hurt me again," continued Emily, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I want you to leave my house and my life. Now." "Emily, please." "Leave!" she shouted, releasing all the accumulated pain. Albert approached, ready to remove Ethan by force if necessary, but it wasn't needed. The ex-groom understood that he no longer had a place there. He left an envelope with the keys to the house they had bought together on the table. "The house is yours. I've already talked to the lawyer. I don't want anything," he said before turning to the door. On his way out, he added, "One day I hope you can forgive me." The door closed, and with it, a chapter in Emily's life. She collapsed on the sofa, hugging herself as if trying to prevent her body from completely falling apart. "It's over, darling," said Albert, sitting beside her. "Now you need to rebuild your life." In the following weeks, Emily discovered how difficult it was to resume a normal life after being left at the altar. The entire town seemed to look at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The messages of support, though well-intentioned, only made her constantly remember what had happened. Determined to escape that toxic environment, Emily made a radical decision: to move to New York. The big city offered the anonymity she so desperately needed. Using her savings and financial help from her father, she rented a small apartment in the West Village and requested a transfer from the marketing company where she worked. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Lucy, while helping her friend pack her belongings. "Here you have family, friends, a support network." "That's exactly why I need to go," replied Emily, methodically folding her clothes. "Here I'm, the poor thing who was left at the altar. In New York, I'll just be another anonymous person struggling to survive in the big city." Emily's father, though reluctant, understood his daughter's need to start over far from there. On the day of the move, he hugged her tightly at the airport, whispering in her ear, "Show them all how strong you are, my daughter. And remember, you'll always have a home to come back to." New York received Emily with its habitual indifference. The gigantic, chaotic, and impersonal city was exactly what she needed. Immersing herself in anonymity allowed her to focus entirely on herself. During the first few months, she transformed her small apartment into a sanctuary. She painted the walls, bought plants, created an environment that had no connection to her previous life. On the walls, instead of photos with friends and family, she hung motivational phrases and diplomas. Her new space reflected her new mindset: pragmatic, independent, focused. At work, she channeled all her energy into growing professionally. She arrived earlier, left later, accepted all projects that arose. Her superiors soon noticed her commitment and dedication. In just 6 months, she received a promotion. Professional success began to fill the void left by personal failure. In parallel, Emily decided to resume an old dream: studying law. She enrolled for the entrance exam at a prestigious university and spent her nights studying. When she wasn't working or studying, she frequented the gym, determined to transform her body as well. "You're obsessed," commented Lucy during a video call, concerned about her friend who seemed to no longer have moments of leisure or rest. "I'm rebuilding myself," corrected Emily. "Every minute I spend focused on improving is a minute I don't spend thinking about him." When she was accepted into law school, Emily decided it was time to leave her job in marketing and dedicate herself entirely to her studies. Her father, proud of his daughter's determination, offered to cover her expenses during her university period. "You'd be surprised how many women come to law school after major heartbreaks," commented a classmate during group work. "It's as if we wanted to understand the rules of the game we lost." Emily smiled at the insightful observation. Indeed, there was something therapeutic about studying laws, contracts, obligations. It was as if each class on civil liability helped her process her own experience, to understand that there were rules even for the heart, and that Ethan had broken them all. In the 3rd semester of college, during a legal event at the university, Emily met Judge Helen Vincent, a middle-aged woman, respected for her integrity and competence. After an inspiring lecture on ethics in the judiciary, Emily gathered courage to approach her. "Your story inspires me, Judge Helen," she said, nervous. "I'd like to know what advice you would give to someone who dreams of following in your footsteps." The judge observed her with curiosity. There was something in the look of that young student that went beyond simple professional admiration, a fire, an almost fierce determination. "You have scars, don't you?" asked Helen, surprising Emily with her perspicacity. "I can see it. They're what drive you." Emily nodded, unable to hide her surprise. "The best judges are those who understand human pain but don't allow it to distort their judgment," continued Helen. "Transform your pain into wisdom, not vengeance. That's my advice." Those words echoed deeply in Emily. Upon returning home that night, she looked at all the books scattered on her study table and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was on the right path. She wasn't studying law to get revenge on Ethan or anyone else. She was studying to restore order to her own world, to make sense of the chaos. The years passed with the speed of pages turned to the wind. Emily immersed herself in legal studies, like someone drowning in a deep ocean, seeking not the surface but the currents that would take her further and further from her past. Her determination impressed professors and colleagues. While other students debated in bars after classes, she remained in the library, devouring books on jurisprudence, doctrines, and codes. During the course, she established a mentoring relationship with Judge Helen Vincent. The magistrate recognized in Emily a rare talent, the ability to analyze cases with technical coolness, without losing sensitivity to the human factor behind each process. "You managed to find the balance between the letter of the law and the spirit of justice," commented Helen, after a court simulation in which Emily shone as a defender. "It's a skill that many jurists take decades to develop, if they develop it at all." Emily blushed at the compliment. There was something in the judge's approval that filled a void left by romantic disappointment. It was as if each professional recognition worked as an antidote against the poison of rejection. In her final year of college, she was selected for a coveted internship program at the New York Court of Justice. Her nights were divided between studies for the bar exam and preparation for public service exams. On the rare occasions when she allowed herself a moment of rest, she looked out the window of her apartment, now larger, in a better neighborhood, and thought about how her life had changed. "Sometimes I wonder if I should thank Ethan," she confided to Lucy during one of her rare visits to her friend in New York. "If it weren't for that day, I might be stuck in clear waters, living a life that wouldn't challenge me." Lucy observed her friend with a mixture of admiration and concern. You've grown a lot, Em. But are you happy? The question caught Emily off guard. Happiness wasn't a metric she had considered in her journey of reconstruction. I'm fulfilled, she finally answered. Perhaps happiness will come with time. While Emily was making her way in the big city, life in clear waters followed its course. Ethan, after the scandal of the cancelled wedding, lived months of social ostracism. His name was mentioned in whispers in the town's cafes, always associated with cowardice and irresponsibility. The Sanders family construction company, where he worked as an engineer, suffered a negative impact on business. Clients cancelled contracts, concerned about the lack of commitment from that family. His father, Ernest Sanders, a rigid and traditionalist man, temporarily removed him from the company. "You've shamed our name," said Ernest with bitterness. "You need to disappear for a while until this storm passes." That's how Ethan, at 30, found himself at a crossroads. He decided to accept a job offer in Denver at a developer that had no knowledge of his recent past. In the new city, he rented a small apartment and began a life of seclusion and intense work. The first weeks were marked by anxiety crises and insomnia. During the early morning, he composed emails to Emily, long requests for forgiveness that he never sent. He tried to contact Lucy a few times, seeking news, but her friend was categorical. "She's moving on, Ethan. Do the same." At work, he channeled his guilt and frustration into productivity. He took on challenging projects, began studying new construction techniques, specialized in sustainable constructions. His superiors noticed his talent and dedication. In 18 months, he was promoted to Special Projects Manager, leading a team of 12 engineers. Despite the incipient professional success, his personal life remained a desert. He avoided relationships, convinced that he carried a character flaw that would eventually harm anyone who got close to him. His rare social outings were strictly professional, dinners with clients, real estate sector events. It was at one of these events, 3 years after the cancelled wedding, that Ethan met Rachel Silverman, digital marketing director of an important developer in Denver. She was the opposite of Emily, extroverted, daring, with a sharp sense of humor and a laugh that echoed through the halls. Her red hair and green eyes attracted all gazes, but it was her intelligence that captured Ethan's attention. During a panel on innovation in the real estate market, Rachel publicly challenged Ethan's conservative presentation, questioning whether his sustainable proposals were genuinely ecological or just marketing strategies. "You talk about sustainability, but your projects still consume concrete as if there's no tomorrow," she provoked, before an audience of investors and industry professionals. "When will we see a real break with the predatory model?" Ethan, initially disconcerted, quickly recovered and engaged in the debate. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he didn't feel offended by the public questioning. On the contrary, he found himself stimulated by the intellectual challenge. After the panel, he approached her at the cocktail party. "Your questioning was pertinent," he admitted, offering her a glass of sparkling wine. "I'd like to continue this conversation. I have some ideas about modular construction that might address your concerns." Rachel studied him for a few moments, as if assessing whether he was worth her precious time. "Normally, men get defensive when I question them," she finally responded, accepting the glass. "You passed the first test." What began as a professional discussion evolved into a dinner that extended into the early morning. They talked about architecture, public policies, literature, and music. It was as if both were thirsty for an intellectual connection that had been missing in their lives. At the end of the night, Ethan realized he hadn't thought about Emily or his past failure for hours. It was a strange sensation, almost like betrayal, not to Emily but to the guilt he carried as penance. "May I call you tomorrow?" he asked, while they waited for Rachel's taxi. "You may," she smiled, handing him a card. "But have something interesting to say. I detest banal conversations." In the following weeks, Ethan discovered a new version of himself. With Rachel, he felt constantly challenged to be better, as a professional, as a thinker, as a man. The relationship evolved with a speed that frightened him, and simultaneously excited him. After 3 months of intense and passionate meetings, during a weekend at an isolated inn in the Rocky Mountains, Ethan surprised himself by making an impulsive request: "Marry me." Rachel, who was watching the sunset from the porch, turned slowly. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious," he responded, although an inner voice screamed, alerting about the pattern that was repeating. "I've found in you something I thought I would never have." "And what would that be?" she asked, cautious. "Courage. You make me want to be courageous." Rachel accepted, moved by the intensity of the moment and the undeniable connection they shared. Ethan didn't mention his past, the cancelled wedding, the abandoned bride. He convinced himself that that omission wasn't relevant. He was a different man now, transformed by pain and regret. The wedding was organized in record time, 3 months of accelerated preparations. Unlike the ceremony planned with Emily, which involved traditions and formalities, the event with Rachel was modern and relaxed, an outdoor ceremony in a historic village on the outskirts of Denver with only 50 guests, mainly colleagues from work and some close family members. Ethan invited his parents, who attended with visible discomfort. His mother, Elizabeth, pulled him aside during the reception. "Are you sure about this, son?" she asked, with genuine concern. "It all seems so rushed." "I'm ready this time, Mom," he assured her, trying to convince himself as much as her. "Rachel is different. Our relationship is different." On the morning of the wedding, Ethan woke up at 5 in the morning, with his heart racing. For a terrible moment, he relived the feeling of panic that had struck him years before. He ran to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and faced his reflection in the mirror. "It won't happen again," he muttered to himself. "You've grown, matured. You're ready." This time he arrived at the altar before the bride. When Rachel appeared at the end of the path decorated with wildflowers, Ethan felt a wave of tenderness and enthusiasm. Her dress was simple, devoid of traditional excesses, just like her direct and authentic personality. They exchanged personalized vows written by themselves. Ethan promised to grow together, challenge and be challenged, build a partnership based on mutual respect. Rachel, in turn, swore to accept imperfections and celebrate differences without trying to mold the other in her image. The party was joyful, watered with artisanal wine and accompanied by a jazz band. When the night came to an end, Ethan felt genuinely happy. He had done the right thing this time. He had overcome his fears. In the first months of marriage, the couple lived in a bubble of happiness and discoveries. They moved to a spacious loft in the historic center of Denver. They decorated the space together, mixing Ethan's minimalism with the vibrant colors that Rachel loved. On weekends, they explored the city, discovering hidden cafes and alternative art galleries. Professionally, they were also thriving. Rachel was promoted to communications director of her company, while Ethan finally received the invitation to return to the family construction company in clear waters, now as technical director, with considerable autonomy. "What do you think?" he asked Rachel, showing her his father's email. "We could move there. It's a small town, but it has its charm." Rachel frowned. "Clear waters, you've never mentioned this place before," she commented, intrigued. "Is there something special there?" Ethan hesitated. It was the perfect moment to tell about his past, about Emily, about the wedding that never happened. But something stopped him. Perhaps fear, perhaps shame, perhaps the superstition that talking about it could contaminate his current happiness. "It's my hometown," he responded simply. "The family business is there." After long discussions, they decided to stay in Denver. Ethan would take over the direction of a new branch of Sanders Construction in the Colorado capital. It was an arrangement that pleased everyone. He would maintain ties with the family business without sacrificing Rachel's career. It was at this time that the first fissures began to appear in the relationship. Ethan, now with expanded responsibilities in the company, spent more and more time at work. Rachel, in turn, frequently traveled for marketing congresses and events. When they were together, conversations mostly revolved around professional commitments and practical matters of everyday life. "Remember when we used to talk about philosophy and art until dawn?" asked Rachel one night, while both worked on their laptops in the living room. "I miss those days." Ethan raised his eyes from his cost spreadsheet, feeling a pang of guilt. "We can resume that," he promised, closing the computer. "How about wine and a conversation without interruptions right now?" They tried, but the conversation soon drifted to work topics. The initial connection, so vibrant and stimulating, now seemed covered by layers of routine and obligations. 1 year after the wedding, the situation had deteriorated considerably. They argued frequently, usually over trivial reasons that masked deeper issues. Ethan withdrew more and more, avoiding conflicts. Rachel, by her confrontational nature, interpreted this behavior as indifference. "You're physically present, but your mind is always somewhere else," she accused during a particularly heated argument. "It's as if you're waiting for this to end, so you can go back to hiding in your protected little world." Ethan felt the blow like a punch to the stomach. She had touched, without knowing, on his greatest fear, that he was incapable of sustaining a long-term commitment, that there was something fundamentally wrong with him. "You don't understand the pressure I'm facing," he defended himself without conviction. "The branch isn't performing as expected. My father questions my decisions daily." "And you think I'm what? A decorative doll who doesn't understand pressure?" Rachel raised her voice. "I lead a team of 30 people, Ethan. The difference is that I don't use it as an excuse to distance myself emotionally." The discussions became more frequent and less productive. They tried couple therapy, but Ethan showed resistance to the process, fearing that his secrets would come to light. 18 months after the wedding, Ethan and Rachel were sitting on opposite sides of a spacious law office in downtown Denver. Between them, a polished mahogany table held stacks of documents that would formalize the end of what was once called true love. Ethan's lawyer, a middle-aged man with thin-framed glasses, explained the terms of the consensual divorce agreement. "Since there are no children, and the assets were acquired mostly before the union, the process will be relatively simple," Dr. Marcus explained, with the naturalness of someone who had seen hundreds of love stories dissolve into legal clauses. "We just need both of you to sign these petitions, and we can file them today." Ethan discreetly observed Rachel. Even in that difficult moment, she maintained an elegant and determined posture, her red hair tied in an austere bun, the impeccable navy blue suit, the perfectly painted nails holding a Mont Blanc pen, a gift he had given her in the first month of dating. There was dignity in her way of facing the matrimonial failure, a quality that Ethan envied. "How long will it take until everything is finalized?" asked Rachel, her professional voice masking any emotion. "Being consensual, we estimate between 30 to 60 days for the judge's approval," answered the lawyer. "It will depend on the workload of the designated court." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest, twice failed in relationships. 2 women who trusted him and were disappointed. The pattern was undeniable, and the guilt crushing. At the end of the meeting, already in the elevator, Rachel broke the awkward silence. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Ethan. Sincerely." "I'm not looking for anything," he replied, his throat dry. "I think that's the problem." "Everyone is looking for something," she retorted with a sad smile. "You're running away from yourself, mainly." The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and Rachel exited without looking back, her heels echoing on the marble floor of the elegant commercial building. Ethan remained motionless, watching her silhouette disappear through the revolving doors. Those words reverberated in his mind with an uncomfortable truth. In the following weeks, Ethan immersed himself in work with even more intensity. He requested a transfer to a project in New York, a sustainable commercial tower in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. His father, despite reservations, agreed. Perhaps the physical distance from Denver and the recent memories of the divorce would be beneficial. New York received Ethan with its characteristic chaotic indifference. The gigantic metropolis didn't care about romantic failures or existential crises. It just followed its frantic rhythm, dragging everyone in its relentless current. Ethan installed himself in a corporate apartment in the West Village, a few blocks from where Emily lived, without him knowing. It was precisely during this period that Emily reached a new level in her career. After passing first in the competition for the New York judiciary, she had completed the judge's training course with distinction. At 35, she had been appointed to a civil court in the city, becoming one of the youngest magistrates in the state. Judge. Helen Vincent, now retired, attended her protégé's inauguration ceremony with maternal pride. "I knew from the first day that you would get here," commented the mentor, while admiring Emily in her newly worn robe. "You have the perfect balance between technical rigor and human sensitivity." Emily smiled, genuinely moved. "None of this would be possible without your guidance, Judge Helen." "Nonsense. I just showed the path. You're the one who had the strength." "Had to walk it." The retired judge hesitated before adding, "Have you told your family yet?" Emily's expression hardened subtly. "My father came for the ceremony. He's talking to the court president right now," she replied, avoiding addressing the true intention of the question. "You know I'm not referring to your father," Helen gently insisted. "Clearwater's isn't that far. News travels." Emily adjusted the sleeve of her robe, buying time to control her emotions. "What happened there belongs to the past. The woman who was abandoned at the altar no longer exists," she declared firmly. "When I wear this robe, I don't carry personal grudges, only the responsibility to do justice." Helen nodded, respecting the barrier that her protégé had erected, but knew that unacknowledged wounds rarely heal completely. The first months in the judiciary were intense and challenging for Emily. Her court accumulated hundreds of delayed processes inherited from the previous judge who had retired. With methodical dedication, she organized the team of clerks, implemented new procedures, and began to systematically reduce the backlog. She became known for her rigorous but fair posture. Lawyers respected her technical capacity and impeccable preparation. Fellow magistrates admired her productivity and clarity in decisions. In a short time, the name of Judge Morrison circulated in the corridors of the court as an example of efficiency and ethics. Her personal life, however, remained practically non-existent. She lived alone, dedicated herself almost exclusively to work, maintained few friendships, most in the legal environment. Lucy, now married and with a small daughter, insisted that Emily live a little. "You've achieved everything you wanted professionally, Em," argued Lucy during a rare Sunday lunch at Emily's house. "Don't you think it's time to make room for other things?" Emily served more wine to her friend, avoiding her inquisitive eyes. "When my work requires total dedication, there are people depending on my decisions," she automatically responded, as if reciting a rehearsed justification. "And what about you? Who do you depend on?" Lucy didn't give up easily. "It's been almost 10 years, Emily. Not all men are like Ethan." The name, though expected, caused visible discomfort in Emily. She placed her glass on the table with a little more force than necessary. "This has nothing to do with him," she affirmed, though both knew she was lying. "I simply chose a career that demands sacrifices." That same week, fate prepared its most elaborate irony. In Emily's civil court, a new case was distributed. It was a consensual divorce between Ethan Sanders and Rachel Silverman. The case, coming from Denver, had been redirected to New York due to the requester's change of address. It was Emily's assistant, Dr. Patricia, who first noticed the familiar name. "Doctor, a consensual divorce homologation process has arrived that you might want to declare yourself impeded from," she commented, placing the folder carefully on the judge's desk, like someone handling explosive material. "Why? Do I know any of the parties?" asked Emily distractedly, without diverting her eyes from the report she was reviewing. "Ethan Sanders," replied Patricia, closely observing her boss's reaction. "From Clearwater's. I thought it might be—" The world seemed to suspend its rotation for a few seconds. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. With superhuman effort, she maintained a neutral expression, although her hand involuntarily tightened on the pen she was holding. "Clearwater's isn't such a small town," she replied, with artificial calm. "It's probably not the same person, But they both knew it was. Patricia, who had worked with Emily for years, knew fragments of her personal history. In any case, continued Emily, recovering her professional composure, there's no legal impediment. I never had a formal relationship with any Ethan Sanders. Ah? You sure, Doctor? The Civil Procedure Code provides— I know the code perfectly, Dr. Patricia, interrupted Emily more severely than she intended. Softening her tone, she added, I appreciate your concern, but there's no reason for impediment. Please, process it normally. When she was alone, Emily allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She opened the folder and examined the documents. It was him, without a doubt. The same date of birth, the same parents. In the qualification form, an address in the West Village, probably less than 10 blocks from her own apartment. The universe's irony was truly cruel. She thought about declaring herself impeded, as her assistant had suggested. It would be the most prudent path, safer for her emotional stability. But something inside her, perhaps pride, perhaps an unconscious desire for closure, made her decide otherwise. After all, what better proof of her overcoming than to objectively handle the divorce of the man who had left her at the altar? Technically, the process was simple. A consensual divorce without children, with previously agreed asset separation between the parties. Under normal circumstances, it would be just one among dozens that arrived monthly at her desk. Emily, coldly, analyzed each document, applying the same professional rigor she dedicated to all cases. She found a small irregularity in the documentation. The marriage certificate presented had expired validity. It would need to be replaced with a more recent one. She dictated a succinct dispatch. Notify the requester to present an updated marriage certificate within 15 days, under penalty of dismissal of the case without resolution on the merits. It was at this moment that the past and present collided. Ethan, upon receiving the notification, personally appeared at the court clerk's office to file the requested document. He was anxious to conclude that process and definitively turn the page on his second matrimonial failure. Fate, in its cruel precision, made Emily leave her room exactly at the moment Ethan was finishing being attended at the clerk's counter. She walked with the erect posture characteristic of magistrates, carrying a stack of processes, when her eyes met his. Time froze. The bustle of the courthouse disappeared. For an instant that seemed eternal. They stood there, paralyzed, like characters in a Greek tragedy finally confronting the inescapable. Ethan turned pale. The folder he was holding slipped from his hands, scattering documents across the granite floor. Emily in turn felt the blood flee from her face, but years of training to maintain composure in extreme situations helped her. She showed no emotion, although her heart raced like a fleeing horse. Doctor, is everything all right? Asked a clerk, noticing her sudden pallor. Perfectly, she replied, without taking her eyes off Ethan. With a controlled voice, she added, Please escort this gentleman to my office as soon as he finishes at the counter. I need to verify a procedural issue. Ethan, still stunned, mechanically bent down to collect the scattered papers. His mind spun in a whirlwind of incoherent thoughts. Emily, judge, his process, divorce. The coincidence was so absurd, it seemed like an elaborate revenge of destiny. Minutes later, he was sitting uncomfortably in the anteroom of Emily's office. Patricia, the assistant, observed him with poorly disguised curiosity. The doctor will receive you soon, she informed, with excessive formality. Would you like some coffee while you wait? No, thank you, replied Ethan, his throat dry as if he had swallowed sand. Is she the judge of my case? Patricia merely nodded, her face a mask of professional neutrality. Before she could say anything, the office door opened. You may enter, Mr. Sanders, announced Emily, her voice firm and controlled. The office was elegant in its functional simplicity. Bookshelves of legal books covered an entire wall. The dark, wooden desk supported a computer, an organized pile of processes, and a discreet plaque with the name Judge Emily Morrison. The window offered a partial view of the New York skyline, cloudy on that winter afternoon. Please sit down, she indicated, taking her place behind the desk. Ethan obeyed automatically. He studied Emily's face, looking for vestiges of the a young woman he had known. He found the same penetrating brown eyes, now framed by subtle lines suggesting more maturity. The hair, once long, now cut in an elegant bob. The posture, always correct, now carried an incontestable authority. He began, but was interrupted by a firm gesture. "We are in an official environment, Mr. Sanders," she declared with glacial formality. "This conversation will be strictly professional. Your divorce process is under my jurisdiction, and I need to inform you that legally, I could declare myself impeded from judging it due to our prior acquaintance." The word acquaintance sounded like an absurd euphemism to describe what they had shared, but Ethan understood the message. "However," she continued, "I see no necessity for such a measure. I can assure complete impartiality in the conduct of the process, unless you prefer to formally request my disqualification." Ethan swallowed hard. There was Emily, the woman he had abandoned at the altar almost 10 years ago, now with the power to decide about his divorce. The irony was almost unbearable. "No, that won't be necessary," he finally replied. "I trust yours impartiality." A dense silence filled the office. There were 10 years of unspoken words hovering between them, a decade of unanswered questions, of hurts and transformations. "We found an irregularity in the presented documentation," continued Emily, taking refuge in procedural formality. "Have you already provided the updated certificate?" "Yes, I just filed it," replied Ethan, still trying to process the surreal situation. "Perfect. With the complete documentation, I'll proceed with the process." Emily maintained the professional tone, as if she were before a stranger. "With the agreement between the parties and the legal requirements being in order, the homologation will occur in the next few days." Ethan mechanically nodded, still assimilating the extraordinary coincidence that had placed them face to face after so many years. His gaze discreetly ran through the office, looking for clues about Emily's current life. There were no personal photos, objects that would reveal a life beyond those walls. Just books, processes, and some framed certificates. "Dr. Emily," he began, hesitant, abandoning formality for an instant. "Judge Morrison," she corrected, softly but with unshakable firmness. Ethan felt the subtle cut of that correction. The message was clear. There was no room for intimacies or shared pasts in that precinct. "Judge Morrison," he restarted, resigned, "I would like to express my surprise at this encounter, and also to say that won't be necessary." "Mr. Sanders," interrupted Emily, standing up in a gesture that signaled the end of the audience, "what happened years ago belongs to another life. We are here as professionals. You seeking the dissolution of your matrimonial bond, I fulfilling my constitutional duty to provide jurisdiction. Nothing more." Ethan also stood up, aware of the insurmountable distance she had established. Not just physical, but emotional. "I understand," he murmured, picking up his folder. "Thank you for your time, Your Honor." Upon leaving the office, Ethan felt dazed. 10 years ago, he had fled like a coward, unable to face the commitment. Now, he was before the living consequence of his actions, not a broken victim, but a powerful and fulfilled woman, whose overcoming made him feel even smaller. Emily, in turn, as soon as the door closed, allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Her hands trembled, slightly when she reached for the water glass on the desk. She breathed deeply, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that encounter had awakened. Patricia discreetly entered the office, observing her boss with concern. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I can ask them to transfer this process to another court if you prefer." Emily quickly recovered her composure. "That won't be necessary," she affirmed with more conviction than she actually felt. "I am perfectly capable of judging this case with the necessary impartiality." "With all due respect, Doctor, but there's nothing more to discuss, Dr. Patricia," Emily ended, with a tone that admitted no contestations. "Please prepare the conclusion dispatch as soon as the new certificate is attached to the records." That night, alone in her elegant and impersonal apartment, Emily couldn't maintain the facade of indifference she had built over the years. Sitting on the sofa with a glass of red wine that remained untouched, she allowed memories to surface. The carefully chosen wedding dress, the meticulously planned dreams, the public humiliation, the nights of crying. She picked up the phone, hesitated, and finally called the only person who could understand what she was feeling. "Helen? Sorry to call so late. You won't believe what happened today." The retired judge listened patiently while Emily recounted the unexpected encounter. When the young magistrate finished her account, Helen asked the question Emily feared. "And how did you really feel?" "Professionally distant," she automatically answered. "Emily," Helen's voice was gentle but incisive. "I'm asking the woman, not the judge." The silence extended for a few seconds before Emily found words to express the complexity of her feelings. Confused, irritated, and, she hesitated, strangely vindicated. Seeing him there requesting a divorce after abandoning me at the altar, there's an almost poetic symmetry in this, don't you think? "Life rarely offers these perfect closures," agreed Helen. "The question is, will you be able to maintain the necessary objectivity to judge this case?" "Of course I will. I'm a professional." Being professional doesn't mean being immune to feelings. It means recognizing them and not allowing them to interfere in your decisions. Emily reflected on those words. She recalled one of the first lessons Helen had given her years ago. The judge, before wearing the robe, is human. Ignoring that humanity doesn't make one more just less aware. "Perhaps I should declare myself impeded," she pondered finally. "Or perhaps this is exactly the case you need to judge to close a chapter," retorted Helen. "Only you can decide that. But whatever your decision is, make it for the right reasons, not out of fear or wounded pride." After hanging up, Emily spent hours mentally reviewing each interaction with Ethan in the office. She analyzed her own reactions, looking for signs of partiality or resentment that could compromise her ability to judge equitably. She concluded, finally, that she was perfectly capable of separating the painful past from her present responsibilities. Ethan's divorce would be treated like any other process. The next morning, upon arriving at the courthouse, she communicated her decision to Patricia. "I will continue responsible for Mr. Sanders' process. There is no legal impediment, and I firmly believe in my ability to separate personal from professional issues." Ethan, in turn, spent an equally turbulent night. In his temporary apartment, surrounded by boxes not yet unpacked, he felt the weight of his past choices with painful clarity. Emily's face, now Judge Morrison, persisted in his mind, not as the abandoned bride from years ago, but as the competent and unshakable professional he had met that afternoon. He called his lawyer early, reporting the unusual encounter. "This is highly irregular," commented Dr. Marcus, visibly concerned. "She should have declared herself impeded automatically. We can request the transfer of the process to another court based on this history between you." "No," replied Ethan, surprising himself with the firmness of the decision. "If she considers herself capable of judging impartially, I won't question her. I trust her professional integrity." "Ethan, I understand your feeling of guilt, but this isn't about personal redemption. It's about ensuring a fair process." "And you think she would be unfair?" questioned Ethan. "After what I saw yesterday, I'm sure she's incapable of that. We'll proceed as planned." The following days transpired in apparent normality. The process followed its regular course. The documentation was analyzed. Opinions were issued. Ethan avoided personally appearing at the courthouse, using his lawyer as an intermediary for any necessary arrangements. Emily, in turn, maintained herself strictly professional, analyzing the case with the same technical rigor she dedicated to others. However, beneath this surface of normality ran an underground current of unresolved emotions. Ethan began to research about Emily on the internet, discovering academic articles she had published, news about important cases she had judged, honorable mentions she had received. A strange and melancholic pride invaded him as he realized how far she had come. Emily, in turn, fought against curiosity about the life Ethan had built after abandoning her. During a night of insomnia, she yielded to the impulse and sought information, About him, she discovered his work at the family construction company, award-winning sustainability projects, technical interviews in specialized magazines. In one of them, a photo of the couple, Ethan and Rachel, at a corporate event, smiling. The image provoked an unexpected pang of something Emily refused to identify as jealousy. 3 weeks after the initial encounter, the process was ready for judgment. All necessary documents had been presented, formalities fulfilled. Emily knew she could simply sign the divorce homologation sentence and definitively close that chapter. It was the standard procedure in consensual cases. They rarely required a face-to-face hearing with the parties. However, something impelled her to follow a different path. After long reflections, she decided to schedule a final hearing with the presence of both divorcees. She justified the unusual decision with the need to personally verify the free manifestation of will of the parties, a technically unnecessary procedure, but within her judicial discretionary power. "Are you sure about this, Doctor?" questioned Patricia, upon receiving the instruction to schedule the hearing. "In consensual divorces, we rarely do this." "I'm aware," replied Emily, without elaborating, "but I consider it appropriate in this specific case. Please notify the parties." When Ethan received the summons to appear at the final hearing, along with his ex-wife Rachel, he felt a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. He consulted his lawyer, who also found the procedure strange. "It's unusual, but it's within the judge's prerogatives," explained Dr. Marcus. "She might want to personally confirm that there's no coercion or regret from either party. Or maybe she wants to see me facing the consequences of my actions," murmured Ethan, more to himself than to the lawyer. On the marked date, the weather in New York was typical of autumn. Grey sky, a fine drizzle that didn't quite wet, but persistently moistened everything it touched. Ethan arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, wearing a sober navy blue suit. In the court's waiting room, he found Rachel, who had come especially from Denver for the hearing. "Is this really necessary?" she asked, visibly irritated by the inconvenience. "I thought consensual divorces were resolved without all this circus." "They usually are," agreed Ethan. "The judge must have her reasons." "The judge?" Rachel studied him attentively, perceiving his unusual tension. "Is there something you haven't told me about her?" Ethan hesitated. In more than a year of marriage, he had never mentioned Emily or the cancelled wedding to Rachel. It was as if that part of his life was sealed in a hermetic compartment. "It's complicated," he finally replied. "We know each other from a long time ago." Before he could elaborate, they were called to the hearing room. The place was austere, an elevated table where Emily was already seated, wearing the black robe that symbolized her authority, with a clerk at her side. 2 smaller tables for the party's lawyers, and chairs for Ethan and Rachel. "Please be seated," instructed Emily, with a neutral and professional voice. "This hearing has the purpose of confirming the free manifestation of will of the parties regarding the request for consensual divorce and clarifying any pending points before homologation." Rachel observed with growing curiosity the interaction between her almost ex-husband and the magistrate. There was an almost palpable tension in the air, a mutual recognition that went beyond the formal relationship between judge and jurisdictional. Gazes were avoided with too much care. Formalities were excessive. Emotional distance was maintained with visible effort. Emily conducted the hearing with impeccable technical precision. She individually confirmed with each one if the decision for divorce was free from coercion, if they were satisfied with the agreed terms, if there was any pending issue they wished to resolve before the final homologation. "Mrs. Silverman," she addressed Rachel, "you affirm that the matrimony became unbearable due to incompatibility of views on commitment and responsibility. Could you elaborate?" Rachel, surprised by the unusual question, cast a quick glance at her lawyer before responding. "Well, Your Honor, I believe our understandings about what a long-term commitment means were fundamentally different. Ethan always seemed reluctant to emotionally invest in the relationship, as if he were waiting for the moment to flee." Ethan imperceptibly shrank with those words. Emily maintained her neutral expression, but something in her eyes momentarily Brightened recognition, perhaps. And you, Mr. Sanders? She turned to Ethan. Do you agree with this assessment? Ethan felt the weight of that question. It wasn't just about his marriage to Rachel. It was about a life pattern he had cultivated, fleeing from commitments, avoiding vulnerabilities, always keeping one foot out the door. Yes, Your Honor, he responded with the honesty that surprised everyone in the room. I have a history of difficulty with lasting commitments. I wasn't fair to Rachel. I entered the marriage without being emotionally prepared, repeating past mistakes. The silence that followed was dense. The lawyers exchanged confused glances, not understanding why a simple consensual divorce homologation was deriving into a kind of collective therapy. Rachel studied Ethan with renewed interest, realizing there were layers to his story that he had never shared. Emily made some notes before continuing. Mrs. Silverman, during the marriage, you mentioned feeling that Mr. Sanders was physically present, but emotionally absent. Was this consistent throughout the relationship? From the beginning, confirmed Rachel. There were moments of genuine connection, but they were fleeting. Ethan always seemed to carry a weight, something unresolved that created a barrier between us. I understand. Emily made more notes. Mr. Sanders, do you believe that unresolved issues from the past affected your capacity for commitment in the present relationship? The question was technically relevant to the divorce, but everyone in the room, especially Ethan, perceived the layers of personal meaning. It was Emily questioning through the official filter the impact that her abandonment had had on subsequent relationships. Yes, Your Honor, replied Ethan, looking directly into Emily's eyes for the first time since he had entered the room. I believe that unprocessed traumas tend to repeat in destructive patterns. My inability to deal honestly with previous mistakes contaminated my ability to be fully present in future relationships. The air in the hearing room seemed charged with electricity. The lawyers, perceiving that something beyond the formal process was happening, maintained a respectful silence. Rachel observed, fascinated, the exchange of glances between her ex-husband and the judge. One last question, said Emily after some moments of reflective silence. Do both of you believe that this divorce represents a healthy closure for this stage of your lives? Or are there unresolved issues that could benefit from additional mediation? Ethan and Rachel briefly exchanged glances before responding to the judge's inquiry. I believe we've said all that needed to be said, Your Honor, replied Rachel, with a serenity that surprised even herself. Our cycle is closed. I agree, added Ethan. There are no more pending issues between us. Emily nodded, making a final note on her pad. Very well. Considering that all legal requirements have been met, and having verified the free manifestation of will of the parties, I declare homologated the consensual divorce between Ethan Sanders and Rachel Silverman, she formally announced. The sentence, there will be published today, and the records will be forwarded for civil registration. I declare this hearing closed. She struck the gavel with precision, a sharp and definitive sound that echoed through the room. The lawyers stood up, greeted the magistrate, and began to collect their documents. Ethan remained seated, as if absorbing the moment. Rachel approached him and said in a low voice, Now I understand many things, Ethan. I hope that one day you can resolve whatever is stuck in your past. She cast a significant look at Emily, who was talking with the clerk. It's her, isn't it? The story you never told me. Ethan merely nodded, unable to articulate words. You should talk to her, continued Rachel, surprising him with her generosity, not for what you were, but for what you can leave behind. With these words, she said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek and left the room, leaving Ethan with a mixed feeling of relief and apprehension. His lawyer approached, informing that he needed to resolve some bureaucratic details at the clerk's office. Meet me there in 15 minutes, instructed Dr. Marcus, leaving Ethan momentarily alone in the hearing room, now empty except for Emily, who was finalizing her notes. An uncomfortable silence hovered between them. 10 years of absence and now just a few meters of physical distance, but an emotional abyss that seemed insurmountable. It was Emily who, surprisingly, broke the silence. You may go, Mr. Sanders. The hearing is closed. Ethan stood up, walked to the door but stopped before leaving. He turned, gathering courage. Emily, "Sorry, Judge Morrison. Would it be possible for us to talk? Not as judge and part of a process, but as people with a shared past." She raised her eyes from the documents, studying him for a few seconds. That seemed to extend indefinitely. "Technically, now that the process is closed, there's no ethical impediment to a conversation," she replied with caution. "But I don't see a purpose in that." "I see one," insisted Ethan. "There are things that need to be said even after so much time." Emily breathed deeply, placing the pen on the desk with methodical precision. "My workday ends at 6 o'clock. There's a cafe on the ground floor of the building next door. I'll be there at 6:15, she finally said, immediately returning to the documents as if to end that moment of vulnerability. Ethan nodded and left the room, feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. After concluding the final procedures of the divorce with his lawyer, he walked through the streets of downtown New York without a defined direction, trying to organize thoughts and emotions. What would he say to her? How would he put into words the regret he had carried for a decade? Would there be any value in asking for forgiveness after so much time? At 6:10, he entered the indicated cafe, an elegant and discreet establishment, mainly frequented by courthouse professionals and lawyers. He chose a table in the corner, away from the window, offering certain privacy. He ordered a coffee, which remained untouched while he waited. Precisely at 6:15, Emily entered the place. She had exchanged the robe for an elegant grey suit, her hair now loose framing her face. Ethan instinctively stood up when she approached the table. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out the chair for her. "I'll be direct, Ethan," Emily began, after making her order to the waiter. "If you expect some kind of emotional catharsis or absolution for your acts, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." "I don't expect anything," he answered sincerely. "Just the opportunity to say what I should have said a long time ago, without expectations of return." Both of their coffees arrived, creating a natural pause in the conversation. Emily stirred hers methodically, as if the precision of that simple gesture anchored her in reality. "I'm all ears," she finally declared. Ethan breathed deeply, seeking the words he had mentally rehearsed throughout the afternoon. "First, I want to ask for your forgiveness," he began, with a low but firm voice. "Not for what happened today or yesterday, but for that day, 10 years ago, for having been a coward, for having fled, for having caused so much pain. I know words don't undo the damage, but I needed to say this." Emily remained impassive, although a slight tremor in her hand as she held the cup betrayed her. "Second," he continued, "I want you to know that there was never anything wrong with you. The problem was always in me. My fear of commitment, my insecurity about not being enough, my dread of disappointing. I ended up creating the self-fulfilling prophecy by fleeing." "Why are you telling me this now?" asked Emily, maintaining a neutral tone. "What has changed in 10 years? "I've changed, or I'm trying to change," replied Ethan. "Seeing you today, so fulfilled, so strong, made me realize how much my cowardice cost us both. You managed to overcome, build something extraordinary out of your life. I'm still stuck in self-destructive patterns, as my divorce demonstrates." Emily took a sip of coffee, buying time to process those words. Finally, she placed the cup delicately on the saucer and said, "Do you know what happened after you left?" she asked, keeping her eyes fixed on the drink. "The weeks when I could barely get out of bed? The pitying looks that followed me for months? The way each subsequent relationship was contaminated by the distrust you planted?" Ethan lowered his eyes, unable to sustain the weight of those words. "No," he admitted, "but I imagine it was devastating." "It was," she confirmed, "but it was also transformative. Each night I spent reviewing laws instead of crying over you. Each promotion I conquered when I could have been ruminating about the past. Each judicial decision I made with balance and discernment. All of this made me who I am today, and for that, ironically, I should thank you." Ethan looked at her with surprise. "You're thanking me?" "Not for the abandonment itself," clarified Emily, "but for the opportunity to discover a strength I didn't know I possessed. If we had gotten married, I would probably be an accommodated wife in clear waters, organizing charity teas and following the family tradition. Perhaps I would have found happiness in that path, perhaps not. But I certainly wouldn't have become the person I am today. A reflective silence established itself between them. Through the cafe's window, they observed the movement of the city that never stopped. Hurried people returning home after a workday, honking taxis, the golden light of late afternoon painting the concrete buildings. "You seem happy," commented Ethan after a few minutes. "Fulfilled," corrected Emily. "Happiness is a more complex concept." "And you? Is there someone in your life?" Emily hesitated before responding. "My life is my career, Ethan. I made that choice consciously. Relationships require vulnerability, and I spent a lot of time building armors." "I understand well about armors," he agreed, with a melancholic smile. "And you? What will you do now that your second marriage is over?" she asked, allowing herself to demonstrate curiosity for the first time. Ethan took a sip of coffee before responding. "Therapy to start," he said with an honesty that surprised them both. "I realized I continue repeating the same mistakes because I never treated the causes. Professionally, I'm in New York to lead a sustainable urban revitalization project. I intend to stay at least 2 years." A new beginning, then. A new beginning. Yes, but with awareness of the past, for the first time. Both of their coffees had gone cold. Outside, the New York sky was gradually darkening. Emily looked at her watch discreetly. "I need to go," she announced, preparing to stand. "I have a pile of processes waiting for me at home." "Of course," replied Ethan, signaling the waiter to bring the bill. While they waited, a comfortable silence established itself between them, different from the initial tension. It was as if that brief conversation had partially alleviated the weight that both had carried for so long. "Thank you for granting me this moment," said Ethan when they were on the sidewalk in front of the cafe. "It meant a lot to me." Emily nodded, adjusting the strap of the bag she carried. "It was enlightening for me too," she admitted. "I sincerely hope you find the balance you're seeking, Ethan. And I hope you find not just fulfillment, but also happiness, Emily." She smiled slightly, the first genuine smile he had seen on her face in 10 years. For a brief instant, it seemed like she would say something more, but then she just formally extended her hand. "Goodbye, Ethan." He accepted the handshake, feeling the finality of that gesture. "Goodbye, Emily." He watched her walk toward the parking lot, her silhouette gradually mixing with the end-of-workday crowd. There wasn't a sense of a new romantic beginning, nor the promises of future encounters, just the certainty that a cycle had finally closed. In the following months, Ethan immersed himself in work and therapy with equal intensity. His urban revitalization project was taking shape, transforming a degraded area in Midtown Manhattan into a sustainable mixed-use complex. In parallel, his therapeutic sessions were helping him understand destructive behavioral patterns and develop healthier mechanisms to face insecurities. Eventually, he allowed himself new relationships, more honest, more mature, without the unrealistic expectations or sudden escapes that characterized his romantic past. He learned to communicate fears and limitations, to establish healthy boundaries, to be present even when emotional discomfort arose. Emily, in turn, continued her ascension in the legal career. 2 years after the encounter with Ethan, she was promoted to the Court of Appeals, becoming one of the youngest appellate judges in the state. Her reputation for technically impeccable and humanistically sensitive decisions preceded her, making her a reference in the legal community. Slowly, she also allowed her personal life to flourish. She got closer to her family, reconnected with old friendships, made room for new experiences beyond work. At Lucy's suggestion, she began attending a reading group, where she met people who shared her passion for literature and intellectual debates. It was in this group that Emily met Richard, a university professor of comparative literature. Unlike previous relationships, where she had always maintained rigid emotional control, she gradually allowed herself to be vulnerable. Richard, patient and perceptive, understood her reservations and respected her pace. The relationship evolved, Naturally, without pressures or exaggerated expectations. On a Sunday afternoon, while walking through Central Park, Emily spotted a familiar figure in the distance, Ethan, accompanied by a woman and a small child. She discreetly observed as he pushed a baby stroller, chatting animatedly with his companion. There was a lightness in his movements, a naturalness she had never witnessed during the time they were together. Richard noticed her momentary distraction. "Do you know those people?" he gently asked. "Someone from the past," replied Emily with a serene smile, a story that finally found its appropriate ending. They continued their walk in the opposite direction without Ethan noticing them. There was no need for a new encounter or additional words. Both had followed their paths, transforming old wounds into valuable lessons. That night in her apartment, Emily found an old box kept at the back of the closet. It contained memories from Clear Waters, including the invitation to her cancelled wedding. For years she hadn't been able to dispose of those objects, as if throwing away the material evidence could also erase the lived experience. Now, however, she felt ready, not to discard those memories, but to reframe them. Each disappointment, each obstacle had contributed to shape the woman she had become, not just the respected judge, but the complete person who had learned to balance strength and vulnerability, independence and emotional connection. She closed the box and returned it to the closet, no longer as a symbol of trauma, but as part of her personal history. The abandonment that once seemed to be the end of everything had been just the beginning of a much more significant journey. On her work desk, a new process awaited her analysis. Another divorce, other intertwined lives, seeking new paths. With the wisdom of someone who had lived both sides of that experience, Emily opened the records and began to read, aware that behind each legal document existed complex human stories, transformative pains, and the constant possibility of a new beginning. Life continued its unpredictable flow. Relationships began and ended. People entered and exited the scene. Scars formed and eventually became just marks of past experiences. And in this perpetual movement, both Emily and Ethan had finally found what they were really seeking from the beginning, not the external validation of a perfect relationship, but the capacity to accept their own imperfections and move forward, more whole, more truthful, more complete. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily and Ethan's journey has touched your hearts. This story of overcoming challenges and personal growth reminds us that sometimes the most painful paths can lead us to the most important destinations in our lives. To continue this emotional journey through equally captivating stories, we've prepared a special playlist that explores other facets of human relationships and their complexities. Find it here by clicking the button to your left. If this narrative stirred emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the challenges and beauties of human life. Share in the comments your own experiences of overcoming obstacles and new beginnings. Your story might inspire other listeners who are facing similar situations. Until our next meeting, always remember that all pain eventually can transform into wisdom.